Shalom, great men of Yahweh. We are going to be continuing on here tonight in the 14th book of Yisrayl, part 2. The 14th book of Yisrayl, part 2. And tonight we're in chapter 15. Chapter 15. This is on page 184 if you have your books. The 14th book of Yisrayl, part 2. This is Sin Never Again. And tonight's sermon is from December 20th, 2014. And the title of the sermon Pastor gave was The Great Beastly System, which leads on the 7 hills of Rome, is bringing about nuclear wars. Pastor says, Shalom, man, we got a crowd here today. Yeah, joyful, cheering and praise to Yahweh. Praise Yahweh, you may be seated. Praise Yahweh. And there was a child called out and said, we love you, Pastor. And Pastor says, I love you too. Praise Yahweh. May the peace of Yahweh be with each and every one of you. The pastor says here in verse 2, when you see these war machines that our world is creating and getting ready for the nuclear wars that the prophets predicted, keep in mind that the prophets also predicted that we would be opposing this Babylonian system that is mentioned in your Bible, in your scriptures. Okay, so remember this, when we see these war machines, okay, that our world is creating and that the prophets predicted, keep in mind that these prophets also predicted that we would be opposing this Babylonian system. And, at any time if you, even when we have the news here on Sabbath, or if you pick up a newspaper, if you read the news, if you go and read it, you'll see that since the time of knowledge increasing, which really this even started before knowledge increased, it had a great leap when knowledge increased, but mankind has always been aiming to find better ways to kill their enemies. Okay, and this is what we see with these war machines that the world is creating. Where they invented, the nuclear bomb came about. The patent for it in 1934, as Pastor wrote, with the patent that Leo Szilard had presented to the British War Office, or it was given to the British War Office, but he presented it and had a patent placed on it in 1934. And then in 1945, I believe it was, is when they used the first atomic bomb and the hydrogen bomb in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And since that time period now, 50 plus years, 60 years later, just because they've created a weapon that can actually, destroy all life and actually cause the earth to be in dismay, or be in a state which is uninhabitable, okay, they haven't stopped. No, they've remember the first bomb they had was the Fat Man. It was this big, huge bomb. You see pictures of it. It looked like some, like a wrecking ball, they use on the cranes to tear down big buildings, and since then they've actually, been improving on their designs and making faster delivery means. That bomb was dropped out of a plane. Now they don't even have to send planes over there. They can shoot these things out of missiles and torpedoes and shoot them from, here in the United States out of the ground and send them all the way across the earth. And if you remember the news article that we watched, it was several months ago, but one of the great young sons of Yisrael, Abel, replayed it in his sermon a couple weeks ago, showing that within half hour to an hour, okay, you'd have an all-out exchange of nuclear wars. The world as we know it could be changed in half hour to an hour. Just as the prophets wrote, and this is what Pastor's always saying. How is it that the prophets foretold these things to come to pass? Okay, how did they foretell these things to come to pass thousands of years ago? And in Revelations chapter 18 and verse 10 for your notes, it says, that great city Babylon, that mighty city, for in 1 hour your judgment has come. Okay, and Pastor, in the recent prophetic word programs and newsletters, he's been writing about this in the blog post. And in case you don't know, they have on the prophetic word table, men, they actually have the blog posts printed out now, so you can take them home and read them. If you didn't have a computer or the internet or a way to read them, you can actually take a copy of those home and read those things to keep up with what Pastor. Well, we can't keep up with what Pastor's writing, but to be able to study, read, rehearse, and study and meditate on what he's bringing us, so that we can have these things in our minds, so we will be mentally strong to withstand the tests and the trials that come on a day-to-day basis. But Pastor says here, when you see these war machines that our world is creating, the prophets predicted, keep in mind that they also predicted we would be opposing this Babylonian system. And that's what we see with Pastor putting out weekly. He puts out, weekly letters to the world, not just like, someone said, hey, a blog post is only like 1,500 words or less or something. Pastor puts out, basically he's putting out weekly blog magazines. They call it a blog post, but weekly blog magazines, 20, 30, 40-page letters, explaining what the prophets wrote and foretold and how we see these things come into pass in our lifetime right now. In the last days, just as Yahweh said these things would take place in the last days, and that this knowledge would be increased. If you remember the prophet Daniel in Daniel chapter 12 for your notes, Daniel chapter 12, and in verse 1, remember it talks about this time period. At that time, one who is like Yahweh will stand up, the great ruler who stands for the children of your people, and there will be a time of trouble such as never was since there was a nation to that same time. And at that time, your people will be delivered, everyone who will be found written in the book of life. So we see that in these last days, there's going to be this time of trouble like never was, and they needed a weapon like they never had, and this is what came about in 1934 with the invention of the computer and with the patent of this nuclear chain reaction. And Daniel 12 verse 4, but you, O Daniel, shut up the words and seal the book to the time of the end. Many will run to and fro, and knowledge will be increased. Okay, and we see this in the last days, that this knowledge has been increased. And they didn't just stop. They didn't just stop once they created Fat Man or Little Boy and said, oh, hey, we have the power to destroy hundreds of thousands of people with one bomb, so don't mess with us. No, these things spread, and people stole things and sold things to other nations. And now not just possessed by one nation, not just the chief of the nations. Of course, that was a prophecy. Remember in Isaiah, it said the house of Yahweh would be established in the chief of the nations, Isaiah 2:2. And Micaiah chapter 4, verse 1, that the house of Yahweh be established in the chief of the nations. And the fact that America was the first one to win the race to create a nuclear bomb actually set it on the map as being the chief of the nations, the superpower of the world. Although it didn't last for very long. They didn't get to hold that title and, walk around strutting with it for too long, because every other nation, was chasing right after. And not too long before other nations got these weapons and, did test with them to show that, flex their military might and say, hey, we're just as strong as you are. But so we see these war machines being created in the world. Okay, the prophets foretold these, they predicted these things, and they also foretold this last day's work. Okay, predicted that we, the house of Yahweh, would be opposing this Babylonian system. Okay, and this is what Pastor is doing with these constant teachings, not just the blog posts, but he does prophetic word shows throughout the week, and the magazines, the prophetic word magazines, the newsletters, and the sermons, and then all the work that's done throughout the earth by those whom he sent out, with pushing the peaceful solution, with pushing the prison programs, the peaceful solution prison programs, and all these things, actually warning the world and opposing Babylon. Okay, warning the world of what's taking place because of this Babylonian bondage that we see the earth sucked into right now. But continuing on here in verse 5 on page 185, Pastor says, if you noticed Barack Obama's speech yesterday, which remember this was 12/20/2014, he was saying that Hollywood shouldn't have backed down like they did. And this shows great weakness. And he said that they should have stood strong. You can't give into dictatorship. And this was back when they had the email leaks. I think it was Sony Entertainment. They had the email leaks that went out, and North Korea was threatening to release certain information if certain demands weren't met. And Obama had said that they shouldn't have backed down like that. That showed weakness. He says you should have stood strong. You can't give into dictatorship. Okay, and remember what Yahweh, Yahweh's instructions to us are to stand against and to oppose this Babylonian system, that we wouldn't give into this lifestyle, and be caught up in this lifestyle, because we see the whole earth. Okay, the whole earth is actually following this way. Remember, Revelations 12 verse 9 says, Satan the devil deceives the whole world. Okay, and we see the whole inhabitants of the earth following after this dictatorship that's been spread forth from the 7 hills of Rome. And even as we've seen here recently with the 10 kings, the 10 religious powers who've actually joined in, and they're reconciling that over 1,000 year rift, and actually coming into unity with this Babylonian system, and the only ones who are opposing this are those who actually are following the teachings that Yahweh has given. They're following Yahweh's laws, and they're following the instructions they've been given from Yahweh's last day's witness. Continuing on here, Pastor says, that's exactly what I'm preaching in verse 6. You can't give into dictatorship. If you just think of what it means when we're opposing Babylon, we're opposing this whole system. The wars and fighting, the deceitfulness of riches that's going on, the traveling to and fro that has taken over Satan's life. I bet she's seen the same island, 50 or 60 times. Well, my face is on that island too, as you well know. Praise Yahweh. And Pastor's talking about this lifestyle that we see in the earth today, the inhabitants of the earth following Satan's way, in this lifestyle of running to and fro and seeking pleasure, eating and drinking and rising up to play, and you see this type of mentality, being promoted not just from Hollywood, but being promoted in every aspect of life today, where man, life is tough, and you're stressed out. Hey, you need to go on vacation, or you need to go get a cruise, or you need to go to hey, you could go to Schlitterbahn. There you go. You go to Schlitterbahn. You go ride that big old water slide. Guinness World Records, the tallest water slide in all the earth. Maybe that'll make you happy, right? Well, yeah, it does. It does bring upon their gods of happiness upon them. Okay, because even as we just seen in the news this week, when they're searching for pleasures, they'll actually partake in risk-taking behavior. Okay, risk-taking behavior, to seek a thrill, and it actually ends up for some very tragic, where they actually lose their lives. They lose their lives all to seek, some kind of insane thrill that comes through pleasure seeking. And this is what we have to be careful of, men of Yahweh, is that we're staying focused on, pushing forward Yahweh's work, and at times we may feel as, well, maybe we don't have no part in the work. Well, we need to get in touch with our counselors to get a part in the work, but also, remember the reading and studying and meditating on the teachings that are coming forth from Yahweh's house, that gets you involved in Yahweh's work, because Yahweh is He's building our minds. Pastor's pouring out this knowledge in these last days, not just so we can sit back and be all not wise and knowing, hey, look at what I know. Hey, let me tell you about this. Let me tell you about that. You think you're in bondage of Egypt? Let me tell you about the bondage of Egypt. It's not for a pride or a boasting, but it's so that we be able to teach and guide others why not to partake of this Satan-inspired system. Okay, why not to get involved in this kind of foolishness, this kind of lifestyle that we see spreading throughout the earth today. To be the righteous teachers who guard and keep Yahweh's righteousness. They recognize the dangers that come from sin, and they recognize the things that lead to those sins, and they put those guards in place, those checks in place, to say, oh, no, that's not the way. Don't walk over there. Walk this way. This is the way. Walk you in it. But Pastor is he's showing here that this Babylonian system, okay, and the deceitfulness of riches that's going on, where, it's almost, we're strange because we don't do vacations. You're strange. I don't go on vacation. Wow, you're strange people. Remember, as I think it was the prophet Jeremiah said, he who departs from wickedness will be accounted as mad. We're looked upon as being strange because we don't live as the world lives. Because we're actually taking a stand and giving the answers to the world's problems. Where in the world today, they know there's lots of problems, but they just want to kind of sit back on cruise control and just hope, that somehow it fixes itself, They'll kill all their enemies, and that's going to be the answer. Well, if we go over here in verse 13 on page 186, Pastor says, the unity that we're going to experience in the kingdom of Yahweh will hold us together forever. Praise Yahweh. That unity, of course, that unity is believing and trusting Yahweh 100%, and His laws that He says will do this if you practice those laws. Remember, prophecy is only for the believers. Remember what Yahweh wrote in prophecy. That prophecy would only be for the believers, and the prophet Daniel even said, none of the wicked will understand. None of the wicked will understand. If you don't put them to work, if you don't practice them, this is Yahweh's laws. If you don't teach your children, and remember what the Peaceful Solution Character Education Program is, as Pastor said many, many times, the statutes and judgments that govern Yahweh's laws. If you don't teach your children when you rise up, when you lay down, don't miss the laying down part, Before he goes to bed, give him something to remember. Okay, so teach your children when you rise up, when you lay down, and don't miss the laying down part. Give him something to remember before he goes to bed. And remember, you can write this down for your notes. Remember, this command was given in Deuteronomy chapter 6 and verse 7. Starting off in verse 1, now these are the laws, the statutes, and the judgments which Yahweh your Father has commanded me to teach you. Okay, so these are the laws and the peaceful solution, right? Remember the peaceful solution, the statutes and judgments that govern Yahweh's laws. And in verse 7, Deuteronomy 6, verse 7, and you must teach them diligently to your children, and talk about them when you sit in your house, and when you walk on the road, and when you lie down, and when you rise up. A constant training, as the signs on some of the walls here in the sanctuary say, think law, constantly having the laws of Yahweh in our minds so that when we face a situation that we might not be 100% certain how to handle, that we will handle these things lawfully and righteously, and we won't allow ourselves, to fall into the trap of the adversary, and actually break Yahweh's laws by going against what Yahweh's instructed. But remember that. Remember to teach your children, and also, importantly, don't miss the laying down part. Give him something before he goes to bed to remember. Now, Pastor says here, with this new program that we're making, I praise Yahweh for it. It's just about finished. And, of course, our experienced teachers are putting these lessons together for you so you could play them a lesson. Whatever place they're having trouble, you could play them a lesson and pretend you're watching television, if that will help you any. On your computer globe, you can play them a lesson in that field. Just push some buttons there and just enjoy pushing those buttons like you do on your phones and things, Laughing. He says, I'm talking to the world. I know there's no one here that has that problem, So even if our attention spans can't focus on reading, Pastor has ordained and established in these last days means and ways of teaching and training your children through the normal means that would be used for entertainment, on the computer or the phone or a television screen. There's plenty of publications and media outlets the House of Yahweh has put out, and then even the one Pastor has them working on now for the feast, with the video game. The resources are there to teach your children, even if you find the attention span is not where it should be, where you can't get them to read, because believe it or not, many children don't enjoy reading. Many of us adults don't enjoy reading. We have to actually strive and train ourselves and do as Pastor said, start to force ourselves so we can develop the love for it. Because if you think back when you were growing up, at least I could think back when I was growing up, we didn't really read a whole lot unless it was some kind of entertaining book, like a story book or a novel or something, a children's story book. Other than that, just sitting and reading, was considered to be a boring thing, and your attention, you kind of lose your attention, and you're like, I'm ready to do something else, But if we strive, as Pastor's given us instructions, strive, set aside the time, when we rise up early, put aside that time, to sit down and to read. Make that time. Put it in your schedule. You're going to sit down, you're going to read, you're going to study, and you'll start actually, especially with these, with all these resource materials Pastor's given us, you're really going to start enjoying studying Yahweh's Word. Enjoy studying Yahweh's way and be able to cross-reference and put these things together and see how Yahweh's plan is, how these building stones are going together and actually being able to understand what Pastor's showing here. Now in verse 18, here on, in verse 16, Pastor says, we've got proofreading now going on too that would help you a great deal. You know, in these blog posts, that's what they used to start off as, is they were the proofreading assignments, okay? And I said if we can get these people to proofreading and really just pay attention, or just really pay attention, show us the proof that you're proofreading, because we'll send you some questionnaires. Look for that. So, haven't seen the questionnaires yet, but maybe that's what's going to be out next, right? You know, we got the answer sheets, the cheat sheets, you know, and here soon we might have the actual question sheets, you know. So, prove to Yahweh that you're proofreading these things. You know, and I think when Pastor first said about these proofreading assignments, I think people were kind of thinking he was, you know, focusing on the punctuation or the capitalization, or, you know, and that was a part of it. But if you look right here in verse 17, he says, so remember what you read. Don't just look for misspelled words, he said. You're going to find those in my writing. I'm not a speller, he says, but I noticed Webster's not either. He laughed. You know, he says, we're finding all kinds of mistakes in Webster's dictionary. The American Heritage Dictionary and Webster's, they don't agree with one another, so that proves both of them are wrong, right? They can't be both right and disagree. Okay, so, you know, the proof that we read these things comes through our ability, you know, to answer these questionnaires. And, you know, although we haven't got the physical, you know, on-paper questionnaires, you know, these teachings pastors given, if we really read and study these things and we prove to Yahweh we're reading them, you know, we're going to find that we're handling our test a lot differently. You know, we're going to be able to actually pass our tests, you know, and actually get over some things that may fall in front of us that we might look at as a stumbling block. And I love what the great Kohana said several months ago. You know, yeah, it can be a stumbling block if you just sit there and, oh man, what am I going to do? You know, I never get past this, you know, but you could actually use that thing as a building block. You know, if you got to chisel out steps into it so you can climb over it, or, you know, you got to puff up yourself, as Pastor said years ago, kind of get some energy up under your arms there and get you some strength so you can get over those things. You know, well, these teachings Pastor's given us, you know, if we read, study, and meditate on the words that Yahweh is pouring out in these last days, this golden oil that's being poured out to us, you know, we will be able to pass these tests. We will be able to qualify for the great positions Yahweh's called us here to his house to qualify for, and we will be able to be used by Yahweh throughout all eternity in serving all creation. Remember Genesis 1:26, Yahweh made man in his image and his likeness so that he could give them this rulership of servitude. You know, it's not rulership like we see in the world today with dictators or kings or presidents or, you know, government establishments. It's a rulership of serving people, serving creation. Remember it said the fish of the sea, the birds of the air, and every creeping thing that creeps upon the earth. You know, because we can see right now, we can see the exact opposite of what we're going to do in Yahweh's kingdom. We can see with what mankind's done for 6,000 years now, we can see how horrible, you know, of shape the earth is in. You know, the fish of the sea, the birds of the air, the creeping thing, and everything that creeps upon the earth is in utter torment, you know, because of the sins of mankind, because of mankind's rejecting of Yahweh's way. Well, in the kingdom, we're going to turn that around, and Yahweh's work's going to be a quick work, you know, as Yahweh's only going to need 1,000 years to clean up what Satan took 6,000 years to defile and confuse. In 1,000 years, he's going to have these things cleaned up, and he's going to have the earth restored back to its original glory to actually show how beautiful life can be, how joyful, how abundant life can be for mankind and for all the things that creep upon the earth. You know, and we're going to have part in that. We're actually going to be able to have part in assisting Yahweh in doing these things, you know, if we qualify for these positions Yahweh's brought us here to qualify for. You know, that's why it's so important, man, to, you know, as the heading of these 14th book of Israel here is sin never again. It's so important to strive in overcoming sin. Strive to become in unity with Yahweh's house. You know, because as Pastor said, Yahweh is going to be, you know, for all eternity, Yahweh is going to be assigning us work. You know, and he wants to know, can we take those instructions he's given us and go and do them without deviating to the left or to the right, you know, as Satan and the gods have done, you know. And that's what we're qualifying for. We're qualifying to be 100% obedient and in unity with Yahweh. We prove it through our day-to-day interactions by being 100% obedient and in unity with those who have authority over us. Either the priest or pastor or our supervisors or whoever it is. We're proving to Yahweh that we can actually take our instructions and go and do that job that we've been instructed to do and not get deviated. Because if we can't prove to do those things, we won't be able to have that position, because that's what Yahweh needs. He needs 100% obedience, because he's not going to be worrying about, someone teaching a different message. No, he's only going to send out those who have qualified to teach, to teach what they've learned. Now, verse 18, Pastor says, but see, it's a unity with Yahweh now that you'll keep us. But you see, it's a unity with Yahweh now that'll keep us in agreement. You can't go wrong there if you're in unity with him. Is there anyone here that thinks that stealing is right? Anybody, any takers for stealing is right? No? I praise Yahweh, great men of Yahweh. Is there anyone here or thinks that stealing is right? No, we know that's not right. You think raping somebody's daughter or molesting his son, you think that's right? No, we know those things aren't right. Now, these are the laws we've got to be in unity on. And I love how Pastor, how blunt he can be at times with Christianity, claim, well, you can't keep Yahweh's law. And he'll say, well, what are you having a problem with? Are you having a problem with lusting after your neighbor's wife? Are you having a problem with stealing your neighbor's belongings? What do you mean you can't keep Yahweh's law? What law of Yahweh can you not keep? Yahweh's laws are actually the peace and joy that bind neighbors together, and knowing that I'm not going to be, lusting after your possessions or your belongings. I'm not going to be disrespecting you. In fact, Yahweh's law actually shows love towards your fellow man. You see your neighbor's animal get out, or you see he might have left something out. You might let him know, hey, you left that out, or your animal got out. Yahweh's laws are actually a way that brings two people together in unity. Just as the scripture said, how can two walk together unless they're in unity? Yahweh's laws brings two into unity, where them two can actually work as one, because in their mind, they're in agreement with Yahweh's laws, so they're in agreement with one another. And Pastor says we have to be in unity with Yahweh, and that's what's going to keep us in agreement. We're not in unity with the Catholic Church, okay? So just remember that if we turn away from the unity, or if we want to buck up or rebel against what Yahweh has called us here to do, the jobs that he's called us to qualify for, then we actually join ourselves, like the 10 kings did. We join ourselves to this Coptic Catholic religion, this evil and adulterous, abominable system. Verse 23, Pastor says, you need to protect your babies. He said, I know people want to kiss babies. Francis loves to kiss babies. I don't know how many he's given a disease, how many he's killed already, but given them every kind of disease under the sun. But you can do that to an infant. And the doctors, when the babies are born in hospitals, they have to give them shots. They've got to get these shots. Why? Well, according to the news media, there's a lot of money in these shots, so the more they give them, the more money they get from the baby that they're protecting with their shots. But Pastor says here, protect your babies. Don't let people kiss them. We don't really have a whole lot of babies on the men's side here, but, heads of household, future heads of household, be mindful of that, to protect your children, especially your babies, and not, people have a habit of wanting to, kiss them or touch them or, protect those. And in the parenting manual, if you're reading the parenting manual, it even talks about, those outside of your immediate family shouldn't even be touching a young child, a newborn, or an infant. You shouldn't even be touching them. So we got to be on guard also not to be bringing them out in the world, because if you take your children in the world, people in the world have no problem coming up to your stroller and touching all over your baby. They have no problem at all doing that, and no, they won't ask. They won't ask because they don't ask, and they'll come and spread their diseases and their germs. So protect your family, protect yourselves, men. And at this time, I will turn it over. If you all stand, men, may Yahweh bless your Sabbath we're about to go into. You have a great Sabbath day. And at this time, I'll turn it over to great priest of Yahweh, the great Khan, Betsy O. Hawkins. Praise Yahweh, great Khan.
Shalom, everyone. You may be seated. We're going to continue with the 14th book of Israel, part 2, chapter 15. This evening we're discussing this terrible, dreadful system of the fourth beast. Knowledge increased with this one, and sin, symptoms, treatments, side effects, treatments, and again, and it repeats itself. And it's a spiral of death that we're seeing in the world today. And only righteousness can swallow death and save you. So this is what we're going to be covering and continuing with in the second half here. Now, Pastor's been discussing here the prophecy written in Daniel 7. And in Daniel 7, chapter 7 and verse 3, we're looking at some details of this fourth beast. Verse 3, and 4 great beasts came up from the sea. Now recognize that these beasts are kingdoms, each different from the others. The first was like a lion, and this is describing the Babylonian system. And remember, it's a world power, a worldwide military might, and it has a far-reaching influence throughout the world in its time. And it goes through describing, using terms and words that represent characteristics. I beheld until its wings were plucked, and it was lifted from the earth and made to stand upon the feet like a man, and a man's heart was given to it. So 4 great beasts or kingdoms came up from the sea. And we want to take notice of this imagery here, this sea, because that, as we've learned up to this point, represents the multitude of peoples, a multitude of people, nations, and tongues. Now the mythologists got a hold of this and they put their own spin on it. And we see this starting here in Rome, and actually it's kind of never left, but this mythology of Rome, it very accurately reflects its description in Revelation, Mystery Babylon, or mystery and confusion. Now, this mythology of Rome, where did it come from? And they have this mythological false story, which people prefer to accept, that these 2 boys were raised, 2 suckling childs were raised by a she-wolf, and until they were grown and mean enough to kill people. And so, that's how Rome got started. And so they say. And you see this pattern repeated even here in the United States under the capital, Washington, D.C. You say to people, they say, where are you from? You say, Washington. They say, state or D.C.? Well, what's D.C.? District of Columbia. All right, it's a district. What's Columbia? No, I thought that was down south. Where does this Columbia come from? And if you trace it back, you'll see that it kind of alludes to Christopher Columbus and discovery and all of that. But in that time period, when Washington was established, when the capital was established where it is today, it was common knowledge at the time, or a commonly used term, they just called it Columbia. So a little bit of get to know your country, but it's always shrouded in this mystery or confusion, or a series of unknowns. And then even, if you take it back to Christopher Columbus. Well, what was he all about? What was that all about? What did he do? How did he do it? Well, that's shrouded in the annals of history, and shrouded in mystery as well. And when they do little truth out, well, it's unsavory, and they try to cover that back up again because, the home team has to win, right? Another one of these shrouded in mystery and confusion is this Satan clause, where another one that came from the 7 hills of Rome. There was a time in this country where Christmas was outlawed, wasn't even tolerated. So we have the mythology of Satan clause, always getting her hooks in everyone once a year, and that's got to be one of the most damaging customs, because it teaches people lust and greed, and they learn how to get offended and retaliate, how to get depressed, how to get broke. And the Satan clause is a super god, because this one can't even die like the Caesars and the Pharaohs did. Now, in the time period of Daniel and the time of when these prophecies were written for us, there were events taking place such that a few of the Hebrews went back and took over the country, and they're still there and serving in Rome today. They didn't start there in Rome, but they came there, and they're continuing to kill people who have any form of holiness at all. And as Pastor points out, this is a true form of torture that they're all guilty of. In the words of Barack Obama, who addressed this issue of Guantanamo Bay, which was brought forth in this time as an example of torture, bringing this to the people's attention, Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton were more or less fighting for this thing to close Guantanamo Bay in the torture center, which was a valiant deed for them that they were trying to do. And Pastor wondered at that time why so few people joined them in that. And the president is still trying to get it closed. And of course, the president can't do all of these things on his own. He's got a system behind him, and each one of these has a system behind them. And I want to, point out, since Hillary Clinton's in the news now, and she's mentioned here in a positive light, remember, these people are a product of their environment, their teaching, their training, their own sins. And this is what's brought forth in their character. But that's something that's changeable. When their minds are inspired and issued understanding, they will be able to change that when they're properly taught true morals and true character. Now, these 4 beasts that these kings and kingdoms are a part of, spoken of here in Daniel 7, you see they start as 4, and then they split. Even though they split in 4, it's called a quartet today. This system, the 4th beast, dreadful and terrible, how could we ever have peace with this working around us? Now, I want to point out the Hebrew meanings of these words, dreadful and terrible. The word dreadful actually, it means formidable. It means to cause to be afraid, but it also implies this idea of to creep along like a quiet gait or timid persons. And if you think of the Catholic Church today, they have that appearance of being very timid. But they're always there. It's always creeping along. But at certain times, you'll see something crop up in the news, a certain event, and you'll see that there's a formidable force and a cause to be afraid, or a formidable force. And this word terrible means strong or strength. And it's like there's many religions throughout the earth, but this one has got haunches. It's got that crouch like a lion. You can see the strength in its loins. And this is the imagery we have of this particular beast. And, this creates this system of destruction that everyone fears. Now, verse 7, after this I saw in the night visions, and behold, a fourth beast, dreadful and terrible, exceedingly strong, and had great iron teeth, and devoured and broke in pieces, then trampled the residue with its feet. And it was different from all the other beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. And as we've also learned, these represent religions. 10 religions that had combined their strength, the 10 which we've just seen recently and spoken of in the recent sermon. But what was to hold them together? And so this is something we can look for, this infighting with one another. And Constantine, he saw this as well in his time, this confusion and disagreement over their gods. And then he combined two into one and gave them one to worship, trying to unify them in that. But they still are disunity. Pope Francis, you're not the only one in your organization who's been confused. This organization has been confused for thousands of years. Your gods before you were confused. And as Malachi Martin pointed out, there would be a three-way competition in this match here as well. But the deciding answer as to who comes out on top of all this, it all boils down to nuclear war. Now, at that time, the temple was a glorious thing. The house of Yahweh was beautiful in its appearance, but it had degraded or degenerated because of these evil priests that were willing to kill and torture and murder. And this was the fourth beast forming at that time. And at that time, they identified themselves as the Pharisees, Sadducees, Essenes, and the Herodians. And the Herodians were the ones that had the vicious army. And what they do with the house of And what did they do with the house of Yahweh? Well, the army that Daniel said that we just read about, with this great iron teeth, an evil army that they all had in their mind, was killing and torture. And we see this in the history books. They used their army to kill off anyone who wanted to keep any of the laws of Yahweh. And so this is what we see among the Christian martyrs. Christianity is not righteous or holy, but within Christianity is the laws. They have today, what's known as the Holy Bible, and within that, they do attempt to keep some of the laws. And to the extent that they attempt to keep those or practice those laws, they are persecuted. And so they're often misidentified as being the holy people who were persecuted, which is not historically correct. However, they do suffer persecution insofar as they attempt to keep any holiness or any righteousness. And Yochanan got to see this beast in action firsthand, because he went about and pointed out the sins at that time and was severely persecuted and killed for that. Now, this book of Revelation was written in about 96. Now, there should be some characters after that. You know what they are? Be AY. after Yeshua, okay? And in verse 1, it says the word see that we're taking note of. Now, Daniel was given the ability to see the future events of these unfoldings that he saw in his dreams, what the outcome would be. How would you like to be able to do that, to accurately foretell the future? Praise Yahweh. Well, if you put your mind towards trusting in Yahweh and on keeping your mind on the things of Yahweh, practicing His laws, and you'll be able to see this as well. And you'll see it through the prophecies. And you can be a part of the future. Now, this way of torture we see for this time period, we saw it in Guantanamo Bay. Now, if they go ahead and follow this way, who do you think they're following? Well, it's certainly not Yahweh, because He has nothing to do with torture. He teaches love. He teaches to turn the other cheek. He teaches no revenge, as the Savior showed us. He teaches us not to take revenge or to retaliate against anyone. And if we harbor any of this in our heart or our mind, then we commit sin, because you don't just commit sin by committing it physically, you can even do it mentally all the time. And this makes us unfit for the kingdom, and it makes us unacceptable. And this is the lesson that we see between Cain and Abel, and what Cain was warned of. If you keep my laws, Yahweh says, this will make you acceptable. But if we break just one of them, then it puts us out. So we don't want to be in opposition to Yahweh at all. Come to unity, in full unity with Yahweh. We certainly don't have, we got 2 years less left now than we had at this time. Yahweh is certainly looking for His harvest and choosing His harvest, so we need to be qualifying and making ourselves acceptable for that. Now, Revelation 13:1, and I stood upon the sand of the sea, and I saw a beast. But here's the answer for what this beast does in the last days. And of course, we see the results here. These bombs are everywhere in the hands of many nations. Each of these nations has enough to destroy the world and darken the sun. So nuclear bombs to darken the sun is what we see. And one of the scientists, I think it was Oppenheimer, even said we have become the destroyer of worlds with this nuclear power and the nuclear bomb. And they haven't stopped. They're always continuing to build stronger forces of deterrence and destruction. And every once in a while, one of these nations gets a foothold with one of these weapons of mass destruction. Like here's the example in verse 49 of India. You know, if they have any reason to become concerned about India, well, if India wanted to, she could knock out all four of the quartet, plus the Vatican, in 30 minutes. So here we see one of these potentially a formidable foe. North Korea is another one that could be potentially a formidable foe. But we're not without help in the last days, because Yahweh raises up the opposition to Babylon, to this confusion, the voice in the wilderness of sin, so to speak. While we face this formidable beastly system, Yahweh told us thousands of years ago that in this time He would raise up one who would preach or teach or raise the alarm, would establish the house of Yahweh in the last days, to stand for Yahweh and to oppose this Babylonian system, opposing everything in it. In fact, everything is against us, against Yahweh's laws, and so we have to cry out and spare not. The newspapers, the police, the judges, the lawyers, everything is against this little system right here that Yahweh planted and said that the gates of hell are not going to prevail against it at this time, or at any time. It's just simply not going to be. It's going to succeed. In verse 50, in Revelation 13, in verse 1, and I stood on the sand of the sea and saw a beast rise up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns. And these 10 horns, and upon the horns there are 10 crowns. And as we've learned also in the mark of the beast and other places, that this is authority. Each one of these is given authority. And upon his heads the names of blasphemy. And this, whenever you have blasphemy, this is the speaking against Yahweh's laws and against Yahweh's authority. So we're fighting the whole system, and the whole system is corrupt, bringing torture, death, sickness, disease. And this system, which was scattered beyond Babylon, then rose from the multitudes, the sea. It established Rome, and then it spread abroad into every corner of the earth. Samuel was shown the full outcome of the people's choice at that time when they wanted a king to rule over them like this, that became this system. The full outcome of the people's choice at that time was this war, sickness, disease, torture, death, and history has established it as a fact. If you break Yahweh's laws, if you transgress his laws, and you do this with your mental thoughts and also physically, if you break these laws, you're worshiping Satan, and you belong to Satan when you do this. Worship means to serve. Serve in any capacity of this word, and you belong to Satan. Satan gives this beastly system authority. Verse 4, and they worshiped the dragon, which gave power to the beast. So Satan gives authority which Yahweh gave to her to deceive and to destroy. And with this power they look upon this beast and they say, who is like this beast? Who is able to make war with this dreadful, deadly system here? And the other nations, they recognize they're contending with a powerful force, a powerful system here. And there was given unto him a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies against Yahweh, and power was given unto him to make war 42 months. And he opened his mouth in blasphemy against Yahweh, to blaspheme his name, which we've seen that, putting his name out of their liturgy, out of the mouths of the people, out of their speaking, out of their songs, out of their writings, and his house. They discredit the house of Yahweh, they ignore it, diminish it, put it down, cause it to be put to death by destroying reputations and so forth, speaking lies, and those who dwell in heaven. And notice this is speaking about heavenly beings that Yahweh created that are already there, not speaking of anyone here that's died and gone to heaven. That's another false teaching. And it was given unto him to make war with the saints and to overcome them. But it's for a limited time. Here's the authority that the beast has, but it's only to a point. There's a finality to this, because it's only until, and then he shows you the house of Yahweh is established and starts their work which opposes Babylon. And we keep on nagging this system, and Yahshua and Yahweh, being the supreme powers, they say that we're going to prevail. And that gives us courage, because it's a scary thing standing in the place of, a little banty hen in the face of a big, large rooster, is pretty intimidating. But we're shown in prophecies that we're going to win this battle. And in fact, remember, Yahweh fights the true battle, right? With righteousness, not with bombs and guns. And all who dwell on the earth will worship or serve him, inspired by Satan the devil, and all the world, all the tribes that are worshiping gods. Yes, they may have some truth, even some holiness, but all people who practice this holiness now, Satan is going after. And Malachi Martin knew this, and he put it in his book, The Keys of This Blood. But bloodline is only worthy when it's kept pure in righteousness. So this blood is not going to prevail in this time. As you can see in Hebrews, it talks about this kingdom that was based purely on bloodline. It's not going to prevail anymore. And all who dwell upon the earth will worship him, whose names have not been written from the foundation of the world in the book of life. Now this book of life, if you notice here, this brings up this subject. The book of life is a book about you. Your names, our names, the names of those who've gone before us in righteousness, the prophets, the apostles, all of these written in the book of life if you're practicing the laws of Yahweh in these last days at his house. And of course, we see persecutions. We see some going into captivity. Many are being taken into captivity in various forms, being held by their nations and so forth. But it's in the plan of Yahweh to allow this. And he said nothing would be withheld from them. The only thing that he withholds from them is his own plan. If they try to alter that plan, that's where they're stopped, because they cannot stop that. And, I would think that they would have to know or suspect that this is the case when their plans are affected. But they won't give Yahweh the publicity for this at all. They won't acknowledge that. But I would think they would have to recognize this. And so, as we close here with this lesson, if you look on the following page, page 195, you'll see this map that reveals this idea of going from Babylon to Rome. But what we see at this time, this Babylonian system, though it exists and is spread through every corner of the earth, the Babylon opposition is now reaching millions and stirring minds, answering questions and providing solutions. Because what we have is spiritual and from above, not carnal or earthly. Like Yeshua was sent from heaven, not physically. He was born on earth and raised and taught all the laws of Yahweh, but was under the inspiration and teaching of Yahweh from heaven. So in actual fact, he came from heaven, the same as you and I right now. That is, we are the result of Yahweh's work from his habitation to stir the minds of people he would inspire to bring forth righteousness as he enjoys righteousness. May Yahweh bless you, and at this time, we'll conclude this lesson. Praise Yahweh.